Hello, everyone. Welcome to UMD Media Show. This is a weekly H panel. The weekly H panel starts now. We are live both on Facebook and YouTube. Those who are following us live, please share, subscribe, like so that we increase our viewership. As usual, the Full House H panel is back with yet another topic. Today, we will be talking about war, peace, and sanctions. That was, as usual, an eventful week we spent. So let's see what the panel thought, what happened over the past 7 days. So we'll start today with Yosef. Yosef, what stood out for you this week?
What stood out to me was closer to home, to Eritrea, the tragedy of Patriarch Antonios, a beloved patriarch who died at the age of 97 after 16 years of house arrest. Not only was he probably one of the few people who confronted Isaias in a country, in a nation that has increasingly become cowardice. He was the one who confronted Isaias throughout the 16 years and before. Probably what struck me was that it was an example par excellence, I would say, in the case of Sha'biya, how it uses totalitarian terror to control, to totally control its population. It's a good example of that one. When I'm talking about total control, I'm not talking about the kind of control that you see in dictatorships. This is a totalitarian control that tries to control all aspects of one's life. Now, in this one, it starts with how to control all the religions in Eritrea. The policy, the religious policy of Sha'biya is that the new churches, quote unquote, the new churches, what it calls, it legally banned all of them. These are the evangelical churches, the Jehovah's Witness, the Baha'i Faith, even the Abyss Prosperity Church is included in this. They are all legally banned. They are all worshipping places were closed and confiscated. Prayers in groups, even in their houses, were banned. And in some cases, they were disenfranchised. For example, in the case of Jehovah's Witnesses, they can't work in any government-owned entity. They were evicted from government-owned houses. They are not allowed to have any kind of license, any kind of trade license or so. In effect, the entire community of Jehovah's Witnesses were pauperized overnight. In fact, they are being helped from outside. Usually money is sent to them from outside by the same believers. Now, when it comes to Islam, Orthodox, and Catholic, which are the old churches, of course, it cannot ban them. But what it did was it tried its best to infiltrate them. It failed in the only in the Catholic Church because of Vatican. In order to infiltrate the Vatican, the Catholic Church in Eritrea, you have to infiltrate the Vatican Church itself. So that was impossible. In the case of Islam, the Imam was almost handpicked by Sha'biya, and he does all the things that they want him to do. In the case of Orthodox Church, it was the most infiltrated, the most gutted out religion in Eritrea right now. And that is where the case of Patriarch Antonios comes in. He was the man who stood against Isaias and against Sha'biya when it tried to control the Orthodox Church. It started with a single incident. I remember it was the Madhani Alim Church in the, the Madhani Alim Church in Asmara. It was at one point in time, it was a huge magnet for the young men and women in Asmara. They used to congregate in their thousands in that church. So this was a no-no to Sha'biya. So what they did was, at one point, Isaias called the patriarch to his office and told him to close the church. And that's where the problem began. The patriarch refused to close the church. Not only he told him, this is the best thing that has happened to the church in years. So why would I want to do that? So Isaias, being Isaias, what he did was he went for the kill. He first, detained 3 pastors that were behind the renovation, behind this congregation of the youth. They were a highly educated group, the 3 guys, the 3 pastors. One of them, in fact, was the only psychiatrist in Eritrea. So he detained them. Up to now, nobody knows exactly where they are. Most probably, as others, they must have died somewhere in any dungeon. You have to remember that in Eritrea there are more than 360 prisoners, all enlisted by name, prisoners for about a population of 3 million. So many of them have disappeared in that Gulag, in Eritrea's Gulag archipelago. After that, I think what happened was he went to totally gut out the Orthodox Church. He conducted a coup from inside and demoted this Patriarch Antonius, and he handpicked another patriarch by the name of Patriarch Lucas. After that, he gutted out the priests and the monks that he felt were against this move. Many of them were conscripted in the army. Imagine conscripting monks and priests and diaconus into the army. And then he cut it off from the church in Alexandria, who refused to acknowledge the new patriarch. In fact, I remember it was in 2011, there was a report by, I think it was in tawahdo.org, by exiled Orthodox priests, and they came up in 5 years only. Now it would be probably double to that. In 5 years, 1,700 priests and diaconus were forced out of the church. Most of them left the country. 1,350 were forced to join the national service, which means the army. We are talking about priests. So more than 3,000 priests were put out of commission. This I'm quoting, through imprisonment, proscription, exile, and forcible conscription. And that is how, after that, he was put into house arrest. Now, let me add one thing more, and then I will stop, to see the cruelty, the extent of the cruelty of how Sha'biya works. The guy was, for 16 years, he was put in a house arrest inside the compound of a villa owned by the new patriarch. Patriarch Lucas lives in that villa, in the same compound. And he was imprisoned on the back of that villa in a service, one-room service, and he was the guards, the private guards of the new patriarch were also watching over Patriarch Antonius. Now, why did he do that? That is the question. What Sha'biya does is, what Isaias always does is to prove, in order anybody who to anybody whom he brings to the top, they have to pass a cruelty test. For example, if the new patriarch protests and says, "I don't want this guy to be in my compound," if you want, detain him somewhere else, then it means that Patriarch Lucas would have failed in the loyalty test that Isaias provided him. For 16 years, these two guys, which are, the uh, Patriarch Lucas is a mortal enemy of Patriarch Antonius. They have to live together in one compound. Imagine that. If you could imagine that kind of cruelty, then you could understand the totalitarian terror that the Eritrean people has been undergoing in the past years. Sorry for stretching it for a little bit. Uh, that's what I found the most notable thing last week. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yosef. Yeah, I think Patriarch Antonio would be remembered as a hero, as a brave man who had the courage to say, to stake the ground. Professor Eskel, what stood out for you this week?
Again, I think that what Joseph said is really important, and I really pay homage to the patriarch who stood for his faith and for truth and for his mission on earth. It's a big loss, but in order for me to say that, not a single event stood for me, but something that is close to what Joseph just said also happened. But two things happened that to me indicate or point out to the political trends in Ethiopia, what will happen in the coming years. Two events, unrelated, but also showing the trend. The first one is a document that was leaked to a media outlet. It was written by a member of the Central Committee of the Prosperity Party and addressed to the party's Inspection and Regulatory Commission, and it was CC'd to the party's president and the vice president. Now, the document complains that the party rules or bylaws were violated and procedures ignored, and demands that the Inspection and the Regulatory Commission take corrective actions as soon as possible. Among the bylaw violation, it lists, there are many, but it lists like including that the CC's or the Central Committee's powers were expropriated, and that the CC was rendered totally dysfunctional. And then it lists some of the bylaw violations, such as the CC meetings twice cancelled, and the third is in the offing, but no notice has been sent out yet. It accuses the party president of creating private networks and implementing his own decisions without consulting any of the party structures through these unlawful bodies rather than through the regular party organs. It also alleges serious corruption, and as an example, it cites that the party did not approve the Prosperity Party did not approve its budget for 2014 Ethiopian calendar. I think this is the year that we are in. And as a result, cites as an example that the Amhara PP officials had divvied up about 60 million birr among themselves, and about 100 million birr is unaccounted for. Among procedural violations, it also highlights that the democratic or allegedly democratic procedures were violated, and undemocratic procedures were employed by the Prosperity Party president, a practice that the document alleges that has rendered the party an instrument of realizing one person's whims. And that's what really surprised me, that there is an internal document that accuses the party president for turning the Prosperity Party into a single individual's property. That's the language that comes from them. And that it says that this actually presents or poses an existential threat to the party. And any party member that complained about all of this were shamed, persecuted, and were slapped this label of being an extreme nationalist or some other things. Now, I don't know if this is a game, but the document seems authentic. The author is allegedly very close, a close confidant of Getu Andargacho, and known for speaking his mind and stating what he believes boldly. I have always personally believed that the PP is not a party that is based on a coherent ideology. And if it is only groups that were put together in just one party for convenience, for the convenience of one man, that sooner or later that it will probably come, the cracks will start to show up. I don't know if this is the beginning of the cracks, but I also think that there are other indications that the time has probably reached. So watch this space is what I want to say about this thing. The second is more serious, and it's related to what Joseph was saying, that it is about the political tension or the political tussle between the mayor of Addis Ababa and the EOC Holy Synod or the Patriarchate. The tussle is over a well-known public square known as Mescal Square, or sometimes Revolutionary Square, previously known as the Red Square under the emperor. Sometimes people refer it to as such. So the mayor was summoned to the Patriarchate to come and explain how Protestants or evangelicals were permitted to hold their religious meeting in that square. And this comes after last year's, on the heels of last year's tussle and last year's imbroglio over the Muslims celebrating Eid al-Fitr on that site. Now, the church claims that it owns the public square because that piece of real estate was granted to the church by the imperial regime, even though everybody knows that that's not the case. That has always been a public square where all kinds of events had taken place, including the revolutionary rallies that President Mengistu Haile Mariam was presiding over. Now, it's not about the land, it's not about church land, or it's not about the sacred ritual site where the church holds its sacred performances. It's not that it was unlawfully confiscated, because I say that the spokespersons for this grievances of the Orthodox Church also say that it's not about the piece of land, but about the systematic attacks that were heard at the church for the last 50 years. It is also not about the land, because the city, in response to the demands of the church, the city had written a letter in which they had said that the city had legalized 1.45 million square meters, or 104 hectares of land in the city that were illegally taken by local churches, illegally taken, and churches were built on them illegally. But instead of fighting with them, raising them, the city actually legalized those illegally confiscated, taken land. So it's not about land. In fact, they came out, these opponents of what the church grievances, or the articulators of the church grievances, say exactly that. What are they complaining about? They're all political. One is secularization, that they condemn the doctrine of the separation of church and state is un-Ethiopian and has been the source of the country's decline. They complain about exclusion, that the church had been systematically excluded over the last 50 years from power, for the last half century, that even today, Orthodox Church adherents do not occupy any responsible position, high positions in the government, at any level of the government in all regions. In fact, they say, which is surprising to me, one of them was saying that there is no Orthodox adherent that is in power in the Somali region, not even at the Kabbalah or the precinct level, even though 99.4% of the population in the Somali region are Muslim. They also complain about defamation and they demand apology. They say there was false narratives against the Orthodox Church that had defamed the church, and all of those who defamed the church should apologize for it. They also complain about curriculum, that the curriculum that was adopted vilifies the church, and that should be abrogated and replaced. They also talk about the multinational federation was basically un-Ethiopian, and the ethnicization of Ethiopian politics must also end. Now, what is this? What does that mean for me? I think their demand is about desecularization and restoration of the church to its uh, hitherto a position that it had held under the imperial regime, and they say that with the clearest language in their writings and in their TV presentations. They claim there is a conspiracy of Middle Eastern Arabs and Western countries that are holding grudges against Ethiopia because of their ignominious defeat in the hands of Ethiopians at the Battle of Adwa. Then they are out to destroy Ethiopia and destroy the Orthodox Church, which was the protector of Ethiopia and advocate of Ethiopia's independence. Now, what is so irresponsible about this thing to me is that they actually claim there is a religious war already underway in Ethiopia, that it did not break out because adherents of the Orthodox faith have decided to be quiet, but they cannot be quiet for any for a long period of time. So, to me, what it is these two things are showing is that the center is not holding; it cannot hold. The PP regime's power base seems to be uncomfortable with the way things are going. I think the road for this country is going to be really a tough one in the coming months, even if the genocide and the civil war is concluded through a negotiated settlement.
Thank you, Professor Ezekiel. Faisal, you have been every week advocating and voicing for what's happening in terms of the famine, the hunger in the Somali region and in Western Oromia. So I think there is a lot to say about that. But what stood out for you in terms of the Horn of Africa in general or Somali in particular?
Thank you, Getachew, and thanks to my colleagues. Yeah, before I go to what stood out for me this week, let me just add a little wrinkle to the discussion that Skial started, which is the fear, if you will, or even the momentum that the activists of the Orthodox Church seem to have gained. This thing has not started just now. For the last 30 years, since the multinational federation started, the church has been shifting towards an active player in the politics of the country. In 1995, I remember Donald Levine wrote an article on the Ethiopian register, which at the time catered to the more ethno-Ethiopianists, whose leadership, whose editors today are members of some of the parties, including the Menelik Brigade. It was published in Los Angeles. And Donald Levine's article was dialogue on ethnic politics. And basically, if I encapsulate his argument, he was saying, shift the national struggle from the one that's currently based on nationality or ethnic into a religious war, so that the country can split not on 11, 12, 13 ethnic groups, but on the lines of Christianity versus Muslim and Islam followers. And around the same time, Samuel Huntington also wrote an article called The Clashes of Civilizations, which when he went and visited Mullah Zenawi in 1996 as part of the USAID consultation, basically came to that conclusion that we need to maintain Christianity in Ethiopia, and one way to do that is to encourage that kind of cleavage. And I remember writing an article on both sides where I was saying that's a very, very dangerous journey for Ethiopia to take, and that is what Ezekiel is saying. Really, after 30 years of slow but politicization of the church mainly, has today reached a pivotal point where you can be afraid of what would be happening in Ethiopia. And if the church activism continues like this, and you don't arrest that development, in addition to what we have seen politics on the national question, it could also, some people may gravitate the whole thing towards religious conflict, and that's very dangerous. Having said that, I think, yes, the Somali region has been very active in the last, I would say, 2 3 months, and you have been reading and seeing a lot of serious developments. And I would contend that it's the confluence of several factors that came together and created this current momentum that we see in the Somali region. One of the main factors that really changed the political game in the region, from one that was more of a slow movement to a more radical left-leaning, if you will, politics, is the emerging active role that the Ogaden National Liberation Front is finally taking place after they realized that the agreement that they have reached with the federal government has completely been trivialized, if not even vacated to a certain extent. And from there, you have seen ONLF completely withdrawing from the sham election as far back as September. That was the first move that they did. The second move was that they were one of the first groups to also denounce the way the consultation commission were selected. As a matter of fact, the person who is nominated, at least for the larger group from the Somali region, is somebody who has been in the political arena for the last 27 years, who has a very, very controversial history in the Somali region. That also was a huge issue for ONLF. Then, thirdly, in the last few weeks, we have seen ONLF re-emerging its commitment to work with OLF and OFC, and also reassuming its position as the vice chair of that coalition, ONLF, OLF, and OFC. So basically, ONLF of the Somali movement has registered both with the federal government as well as with the regional government that's headed by Mustafa, that they no longer play that safe game that they have been playing for the last few years, just in order to give time to the peace agreement that they have signed with the federal government, which is by now barren and doesn't work for them. Then that the other development that came into the Somali region is the birth of the Congress for Somali Cause, or Danta Somalia, which really brought into the Somali politics a new energy of young, educated, who can speak the Ethiopian nuance politics, if you will, who most of them put Mustafa, the position that he holds. They were the co-founders of the small but active party that finally negotiated with the different movements in Ethiopia that somehow ended up giving Mustafa the role. These are people who know him, whom he can no longer accuse them of being Al-Shabaab, which is really the cherished accusation word for any Somali that just lifts his head and challenges something that's happening in the region. These are ministers that worked with Mustafa, and they really earned the position to first give him a benefit of the doubt, but finally saw that he's difficult to work. He's a one-man show, and there is nothing that's happening in terms of normalization in the region. Then the one little serious but very significant development that also came into the play in the last few months is the opening of a very effective and influential media, independent media for the first time, that's coming from the Somali Voice. Two of them, SSTV, which is based in Nairobi, which has been active for a while, but now has taken really a new height, and Karamara TV, which has really shook the grounds in the Somali region. People basically, the way some underground shows and radios used to be waited for in autocratic societies. People wake up in the morning and say, did they air something new? It's Karamara TV, and I every now and then provide articles to that. Then the famine, which we have spoken several times, and now Somalis are creating a nomenclature for the famine, and they call it the Madammer famine. Remember, Madammer moved into Bilsigina, which was prosperity in short period of time. The prosperity that was promised to people, words that came from the Bible, are today sort of an identification for the death that has fallen into that part of Ethiopia and in Oromia, and definitely also in Afar sections. And this famine is really, really eating up into the guts of Somalis and Eastern Oromia. Basically, people are dying. This is really a very sad commentary for the 21st century. People are dying for the lack of water, not only animals. There are videos that have been posted that people are saying, my son died because of lack of water. Elderly people are saying so and so is, under that hat and dying because of water. This is not something that we have seen in previous, at least famines. People used to complain about dying for the lack of food and ration. This time it's water, and because of the area, because of the fact that rain hasn't come for several seasons, and because of the fact that the government has been sleeping at the wheel. This famine is very unique in the sense that it comes at a time when the prime minister of the country promised prosperity, but people are dying from lack of water. One very sad story that happened was there was a family in a small region where people complained and reported 5 kids dying from the famine, and gave that report to the BBC Somali program. And fathers were interviewed who said, yes, my child died because of famine and we need some help. 2-3 days after, the government bureaucrats went there, just like Abdillah used to do, and coerced that family to change their words. And the family and then government reporters said it was because they swallowed something that killed the 5 kids. Now, what made all that a fallacy and fake news today is that an adjacent region on the Somalia border reported today and said the first casualty took place in this area abutting Ethiopia, and people died. One person died because of lack of water. So that whole fiasco that they committed, not because people died, but because they wanted people to change their story in the middle of the death, also backfired. Finally, I think you have heard and covered the split of the PP party in the Somali region. Actually, prior to Tsege's leaked memo, which Skayal mentioned in the Amara region, the Somali PP first was the first group that really showed a crack within the PP. And this is not simply somebody writing a letter to the president, i.e. Abiy, who is the president of PP, but basically a significant number of leadership, including the most recent leader of the security sector of the entire Somali region, Abdi Adil, has literally joined the split, and it's a very, very deep split in that. Just I like to say as a concluding remark on this issue that what we see in the region is basically an autocratic system. An autocratic system is usually defined by lack of vision, and there is no statecraft taking place in the area. What you have is a coercing of the people, and basically the government putting a heavy hand on crafting not really the state, but the way people would think or the way people would express their views. It's very sad that in the last 3 weeks, so many media has been released that Mustafa used to say when he was an activist. His favorite terminologies of freedom of expression and freedom of, and all that has been thrown out of the window. You have seen people's homes have been attacked. Jigjiga today is replete with Liu police literally crisscrossing the streets on SUVs and on trucks people's homes have been invaded, and even former uh, uh, leaders of the PP party who were residing in government provided houses have been literally invaded, and this unceremonious way that the Liu police trashes their utensils and their properties and their, where their kids live is something that we have never seen. It's not the first time. In fact, one of the people that you interviewed, Getachew, some time ago, Mohammed Olad, who was the special communication advisor for Mustafa, the day he left the office, within the next morning, his house was attacked and littered, literally like ransacked. And you see furnitures and tables and pillows and mattresses being thrown out of. People are not even given a chance to collect their things for 2 days, 3 days, and just vacate. What's happening in the Somali region is really an eye-opening to what will be happening in other parts of the region if these conditions are not arrested. Autocracy has set in Ethiopia. It may be feasible in the regional areas because it's farther from the center, but the green light that little autocrats in the regions are getting from Addis Ababa is the key. And if that continues, what Jigajiga is experiencing today could be replicated in Adama, in Gondar, in Addis Ababa, and elsewhere.
Great, thank you, Faisal. I think for the topic for the day, the war, peace, and sanctions, there were a lot of things happening in the region, including war on the eastern side, on the Afar region, and then there was a talk of peace. This is the Deputy Secretary General of the UN, Amina Mohammed, in the region, talking about much better place in Ethiopia for the Tigray war to be resolved peacefully. And there was a lot of talk about the case, the filing of a case by the Pan-African Lawyers Association, and we saw as well talk of sanctions in the US. So with that, maybe with the remaining time, if we can be very brief on your intervention. So Yosef, how do you assess war, peace, sanctions in the region?
Okay. I'm not sure how brief you can be, but maybe you have in mind when you set the title War, Peace, and Sanctions, how sanctions is related to both of them. Usually, in ideal cases, we imagine sanctions deterring war and promoting peace. But such neat categorization is not possible at the ground level, when you see it at the ground level. For example, you could see war leading to peace, a war against genocide, or the Nobel Prize Peace facilitating war. So it's not a neat categorization, that's what I mean. But anyway, to make it brief, as you said, let me say this is one of the problems that I find with all forms of sanctions so far, either proposed, as in the case of the new one, the bill that is that has yet to pass in the House, and other sanctions that have already been imposed. If you look at all of them, for me, the main problem has always been, and I have been stressing that many times, is the time factor. The time factor, by the time factor, I mean, they seem to ignore that the humanitarian crisis, the urgency of the humanitarian crisis, doesn't give enough time. They are not bound by the constraints of time that is embedded inside the humanitarian crisis, for example, that is taking place in Tigray. Let me, in order to make it brief, let me try to bring an example. Think about a family of 10 stranded in the middle of nowhere. Could be the Arctic or it could be the desert. It's just a thought experiment. Now, this family have a food supply that would last it for a whole year. in between, nobody is going to come to help them. They know that help would come after 1 year. Now, if they stretch it, until that year, then they will survive. Unfortunately for them, let's say an accident happened, a fire accident that destroyed half of their food supply. Now they would be faced with an existential dilemma. That existential dilemma would be either, or the first scenario would be for the 10 of them to share the food supply that is left. It will end only up to 6 months and face death after that for all of them. It would be an imminent death for all of them. Or the second scenario would be to come up with a triage, with some kind of triage where, let's say, 5 of them would be eliminated at the very beginning of the of this thought experiment, at the very beginning, so that 5 of them would survive. The 5 of them will use the food supply that is left for a whole year. It would last them for a whole year. Now, when I am saying this, I am not saying that I'm not proposing any kind of triage or similar triage in regard to Tigray. But what I am saying is that the Tigray case is similar to the first scenario, where the 10 people use collectively all the resources that are in their hands, all the food supplies that are in their hands until it lasts them, and then suddenly the entire population faces a big problem. It's almost like walking towards a cliff without realizing it. When you look at Tigray right now, it's using the food supply that it has collectively. People are sharing whatever they have in between themselves, be it families, friends, neighbors. Even the government is doing that. The Tigray government is doing that. For example, it's feeding the soldiers that have returned from all over Ethiopia and that have been there. It's feeding collectively after gathering from the people, mostly from the peasants in that area. So in a way, what we are looking at is the entire Tigray is consuming a collective food supply that would last it until it ends suddenly, it abruptly ends suddenly. So there is the semblance of normality that we see now in Tigray could fool us, because the fact that they are sharing had made it seem as if it's incremental in nature. As if the crisis, the humanitarian crisis in Tigray is incremental in nature. It's not incremental. By incremental, what I mean is, for example, 1,000 people will die this month, 2,000 the next month, 3,000 the third month, and so forth. That's not the way it is. It is going smoothly until suddenly, when the entire Tigray will face a totally depleted food supply. Now, it could happen, I don't know, 3 months from now or 4 months from now. I have no idea, but it will happen if humanitarian assistance is not doesn't get into Tigray massively in massive quantities. So what I'm saying is the sanctions that are being proposed now, that have been proposed before, that have been imposed, because you see, first of all, it takes time to propose it. For example, the bill that is now in the House of the committee, it will have to pass from the House. Then it will be up to discretion of the Secretary of the State, Blinken, to apply it. When it applies, it will take time to bite, because it doesn't necessarily bite the first time they impose on the people. And then the governments also, especially the genociders, are willing to take a beating in order to conduct their genocide, in order to take their genocide into a final solution. So you have all these stages, which takes, I don't know, months, at least 9, 6, 10 months to figure out whether it worked or not. That is not going to work in regard to Tigray, which faces a humanitarian crisis that, unless people really look at it very carefully, it's not going to provide time. For example, what I'm afraid on both sides is not only on the sanction side from the outside world, what to do in the case of Tigray, but also from the leadership of Tigray. It's easy for them to sleepwalk into this cliff, followed by the normalcy that is existing right now. Well, relative normal. I'm not saying it's normal. It's still there. That is what is existing right now in Tigray. But somehow that could fool them and they could sleepwalk into it. So both on both sides, both on the Tigray leadership side and both on the international community, they have to see this problem, the structure of this problem for what it is, and whatever attempts they make to resolve this problem, it has to take into consideration this time factor. Okay, I'll stop there. I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you, Yosef. I hear you loud and clear in terms of the normalizing of the suffering and normalization of the trend that could lure people and those who can act. Professor Etkel, when we talk about war, it's not about only what happens in Tigray and surrounding Tigray. We have this week also saw the increasing um, developments around the, I think it's west north Oromia, on the way from Addis to Bahar Dar also. So what is your reading of what's happening from Washington to European Union and versus what's happening in the region in terms of war and peace?
Yeah, I think war is continuing, and you rightly pointed out that we sometimes make the slight mistake of simply looking at the large engagement and then kind of downplay the skirmishes that are, or alleged skirmishes that are occurring elsewhere. This is a civil war in the country, and it involves people or the country in all regions. As you just said, that the war is continuing in eastern Afar because attacks from the east in the area of Abala, they could get up to 30 kilometers east of Mekelle. So it's a dangerous place. TDF must fight back, and they're pushing, or whoever is fighting from the Afar side, to try to make their way to Mekelle and embarrass the TDF or claim an undue victory by making incursions from the east. So, yeah, war is happening in that area because the TDF rightly must fight back and repel the onslaught from that area. But war is also happening in the west, the western part of Ethiopia, especially in the Oromia region, Western Oromia region, in the Kellam Wallagga region. There is about a division of the Ethiopian National Defense Forces that was sent to that area, and there is also criminal gangs that are roaming around and killing people. And we heard this week that about 162 people were massacred in that area. One of the things that people should understand about Western Ethiopia is that there are settlers who came during the 1994, 84, 85 famine and settled in the areas that I just mentioned. One of the largest integrated settlements is in Kellam Wallagga. So the settlers there are armed, and they are used as the fifth column to fight against the Oromo Liberation Army operations in that area. So the war in that area is not simply the ENDF engaging the OLA. It is the settlers that are in that area that are armed, that are incited against the local people with whom they had lived for more than 40 years. They have become part of the community. But outsiders, especially the Fano, coming and arming them, and of course previous governments had been arming them as well, pitting one group of people against the other in that area. So war is continuing in that area as well. The area that you mentioned, northwest of Addis Ababa, on the road to Bahar Dar, was apparently uh, uh, closed, and that doesn't surprise me because there are two OLA forces that are operating, one from northern Wallaga in the Horo Guduru region, and if they simply cross over the Bure bridge, they could approach this road that is leading from Bahar Dar to Addis. And also, there are also OLA activities or combatants in the central region in the area known as Western and Northern Shawa region. So, yes, there was an operation as well in that area by the OLA. It's the west and northwest, but there is also a war in the south. The OLA in the south had been gaining against the ENDA forces for some time now. They're not holding cities or the areas that they had occupied, but this is happening all the time. So the civil war is continuing all over Ethiopia, even though for some that the war had apparently stopped in the north, which is not true. It's not only in the eastern front. There is activity to the southwest towards the area of Dabark. There is also activity toward the west. The war has not stopped, and there is also in the Raya area there is war. So war has not stopped in Ethiopia, and in fact it has expanded to all of the areas that we just mentioned. At the same time, peace, because the title is War, Peace, and Sanctions, so the peace negotiations is probably also taking place, and I think they're making some progress in the sense that both sides want to talk to each other. It's not the Africa Union initiative led by Obasanjo. It's probably the Uhuru Kenyatta initiative in Kenya that is supported, as we have said here, supported by the United States and by China, and to some extent folding the Obasanjo initiative into the Uhuru Kenyatta initiative as well. So some negotiations are probably going on, but it is also facing internal rebellion from the Prosperity Party, different Prosperity Party groups. So some negotiations probably going on, but not really so. But in the area of diplomacy, because we mentioned also the sanctions, I think something is going on as far as I'm concerned. Some form of deft diplomacy is probably going on. The reason that I say this is that the West in particular had decided that attempting to get a regime change or to occasion regime change in Ethiopia might even lead to a catastrophic outcome if there is really no legitimate and not legitimate but acceptable replacement to this government. Rather than embrace the fate of regime change with its repercussion and the human cost and the many uncertainties, unknowns that could occur when there is no authority or where there is a collapse of authority at the center, the unknowns are greater, the catastrophe could be greater. So the West had embraced the idea of living with Abiy Ahmed. They have accepted the idea of leaving him in place for now, but putting more of their faith in what is known as the national dialogue, that the national dialogue might lead to some kind of political settlement that could also lead to some kind of change or transitional government, probably coming out of. And I'm saying that I'm not saying that this is what's going to happen, but maybe the West is hoping that this is the best alternative, putting their faith in the national dialogue. The reason that I say this is a kind of a deft diplomacy is, on the one hand, the administration, the area of the body of the United States government that is concerned with the long-term strategic implications of ceding the Horn of Africa to China, could be for the United States and for the West in general, had started to make overtures to Abiy Ahmed and even to Isaias Afwerki that the United States and the West are not against them. They are not going to go and seek regime change. But at the same time, the deftness of that diplomacy is at the same time in the Congress And through the UN, they are telegraphing a message that they would like to leave them in place, so that there could be peace in the Horn of Africa region. So the United States government, the administration, on the one hand, is trying to make overtures to both dictators, but also advancing sanctions in the Congress, so that they could use that as a leverage, as a demand of the law, to play the carrot and stick diplomacy. That's what's going on. And finally, I'll say this about the UN, and I'll stop. I thought the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, in going to several places in Ethiopia, I thought that the Ethiopian government was using her. She went to the Amhara area, to Afar, and to Tigray, and to the Somali area, but she highlighted important issues in all of these places. In Samara, she went to a hospital where the war victims, young war victims, were there. In Tigray, she went to the hospital and emphasized the impact of the war, particularly on children and women. In the Somali region, she highlighted and emphasized the drought and the famine and its devastating effects on women, children, everybody else in that area. All of these things are a matter of concern for a UN official. Climate change, genocide, peace, all of these are important to them. So people could interpret what she is doing as kind of being manipulated by the Ethiopian government. But what she said at the end, to me, suggested to me that it was kind of some deft diplomacy. Look, this is what she said at the end. The entire trip, she said, is a journey of solidarity with the Ethiopian people. That's important. When asked, she is describing that her journey is a journey of solidarity with the Ethiopian people. And she said she wanted peace. There is a huge possibility for peace, huge opportunity for peace. But she also said that the urgency of the delivery of humanitarian aid, she said, should have been delivered yesterday. She emphasized the importance of humanitarian aid delivery, which Joseph highlighted, the importance of the urgency of now. She said it should be yesterday. But since then, when we get peace, what I found very important is that when we get peace, this journey will bring us back to economic recovery, into the restoration of the dignity, human dignity and livelihoods. I thought that was really in concert with the mission of the United Nations, and there is some kind of deft diplomacy going on, given the depravity that is going on in Ethiopia.
Great. Thank you, Professor Sgel. Faisal, what's your reading of the topic, the war, peace, and sanctions in the region?
Yeah, I think with the war, it could probably mutate from what we have seen in 2021, where the TDF was fully in a very sophisticated combat situation with a weak TDF. I think that has been changed because of several factors, primarily because of Turkey and United Arab Emirates, both of them U.S. allies. I contend that the United States government gave those two countries a tacit approval to go ahead and give a limited supply of what Abiy and his team want, so that, quote unquote, they can save the big country of Ethiopia, Africa's home. So U.S. and the West, and to a certain extent, the United States, did not play directly in the war, but in a very indirect way. They were partners in the war, because they have never even lifted a finger and said one harsh word about the supplies of drones by those two governments, particularly Turkey, which is an ally of the United States. So the war may mutate into a sort of like a protracted long war that will not end in 1 year or 2 years, unless we have mass upheavals, particularly in Oromia, just like we had the Cairo last time, where urban life becomes unmanageable for the Ethiopian government. Therefore, they will seek some sort of resolution. But with the status quo, I think Joseph mentioned a little bit. I think governments have tolerance once they come back from a defeat. They have deep tolerance to a protracted war, and probably the longer the war continues, the more that they can recoup some of the things that they need. So, as Scale was saying, the war is taking place. It will continue. It may change locations and what have you. With the peace, I think up to this point, since TDF returned back to its region, I see more lip service and diplomatic dancing around the issue of peace, by both by the United Nations and the Western nations, as well as the United States, than a real meaning, in the sense that everybody now sees that the route which Abiy took to bring together combatants in the war, to talk about peace, is not really happening. As I said last time, I'm not that much privy to what's happening in Nairobi. I don't want to put a lot of hope on Uhuru in Nairobi, simply because we don't have the details, except that he's playing a significant role with the U.S. But as a student of a good reader of the United States politics and policy in Africa, I would really move very conservatively as to what I would expect from the US for this. I mean, this is a country historically that harbored, the former dictator of Congo, and, that of Philippines. And if they get that little niche where they feel comfortable, where the state that they are dealing with can control to a certain extent its day-to-day life, its borders, it is routine kind of business, the US has no qualms to go to bed and sleep with an autocrat or a dictator. And I think with the comeback of Abiy, which in my opinion, they have had some hand, either by tacitly approving his reforms, which to the Ethiopian people are meaningless, or implicitly by being silent and being quiet when supplies of very dangerous genocidal weapons were given to the Ethiopian government. I think all those speak to the fact that the international role of peace is diplomatic, limited. When I say diplomatic, I think we have to underscore the fact that diplomacy gives priority to the sovereignty, quote unquote, of the nation state that controls at that particular time the country. So as much as they can give grounds to Abiy and his government, diplomacy would be giving that. And that's the language Scott was probably mentioning when the United Nations lady visits all the region and says, we are doing this for the Ethiopian people. I think to her, the Ethiopian people is synonymous with Arat Kilo, or whoever is sitting at Arat Kilo. And what was very interesting was President Sahle-Work also said something that upset most of the Somalis in that trip, where she said, to the credit of the regional administration that has been hiding this famine until some of us really blew the siren. She said, you have done what you could do. You have done what you could do, which undermined the people who rose from the ground and say, hey guys, we are under a severe famine. Can you just look down? As of today, there is not any meaningful hand that comes from the international arm. In terms of the sanctions, I think, again, the sanctions that is supposed to be effective, I think, very soon, which was the AGOA sanctions, was as probably more negative impact on average people than what it would have to Abiy's authoritative power and what have you. I am really surprised at this point in time, how the United States have not acted more serious sanctions, including military and weapon sanctions, because I was in the first meeting that was assembled by some, the State Department to just share ideas. And this was about a year and plus ago that the idea of sanction was touted. And as of today, there's no meaningful sanction that's taking place. You can tell that it became an open-ended discussion, both the State Department as well as some of the U.S. congressional area. But any sanction that really targets not at the point where it hurts the average factory worker person, but the government is deep muscle, including arms sanctions, including talking to and putting sanction on the suppliers of dangerous weapons. I think that's when sanctions do have meaning. I think peace should have included, in my opinion, peace should have included. I think Yosef probably touched a little bit that on the edges. Peace and encouraging a peace process should have included feeding and giving medicine to the people who have been blockaded for over a year. That's not even part of the discussion. So are we talking about peace when 10,000, 15,000, 30,000 people die in Tigray, and then the kids that have been left by the mothers who died out of, from lack of medicine and diabetes and cancer and what have you, rose and hit the streets, and they themselves become kids who roam around the city of Makale and others. I mean, we need to put these things into sort of framework so that we understand what is the peace that we are looking. How long is this peace taking place? Knowing that Abiy has circumvented and hijacked the peace process that probably some of well-wishing Westerners had. What peace are we talking, and in what frame? And I really don't have an answer for that.
Okay, thank you, Faisal. I think there is a lot to cover. Even the topics are purposely chosen to be big topics that could be taken in different panels. So let's go maybe, because we are over the hour now, to the last word. So Yosef, what's your last word for today?
All right. Already Faisal has touched it. We know that in Tigray, not a single foot of track. Imagine that, not a single foot of track has made it for a long time now. With that in mind, I'm still questioning, the Tigray leadership in this case, because how is it possible to conduct a peace process in Nairobi or wherever it is, without making it a precondition that food, the first precondition that should be done, for any process, peace process to go is free access to food and medicine. That should have been the first thing. That to me is probably a riddle that has become a riddle for me. Another one is what Professor Hiskiel has been talking about when he talks about the West seeing no other alternative to Abiy at this point in time. Now, if through some kind of a miracle, some kind of a compromise is reached, let's say, between TPLF and the Abiy government, and some kind of settlement, they have reached something here. What could it possibly be? It could possibly be, because we are looking at genociders on the other side and their victims on the other side. We'll have a solution without resolution. That's how I put it, because that solution, it will keep the hate, the conflict, the animosity will keep simmering for years to come. Because when you do some kind of a reconciliation, supposedly it's because the genocide is over. The genociders are no more in a position to conduct any more harm. But that would be impossible in the case of Ethiopia, because we'll have both of them. So what the West is trying to do, the compromise that it tries to reach in Ethiopia, and if indeed it reaches, would be probably one of those cases where we will keep having a problem all the time with you. That to me is also worrying. Another one is the one Faisal has been mentioning in regarding, for example, what kind of sanctions are being proposed up to now, or imposed and proposed up to now. For example, in the case of Eritrea, it's a joke. It's absolutely a joke because nothing that the US have done, the sanctions that the US has imposed on Eritrea have no bite at all. If they really meant it, they could have focused on the military supply line of Eritrea. That's one. And if they really want to make an impact on its economy, it's the mining companies that has to be targeted. So neither of them are being done. The last one that I want to talk is about the role of religion, as mentioned again by both panelists. And it's just to remind, I know the Coptic Church is in the worst shape right now. Remember what they have done to their own kin, let alone to other religions, the things that has happened in Tigray. Remember this week, it was the artifacts, the religious artifacts of Tigray has been on eBay. So we could see that clearly. If they could do that to their own kin, what they could possibly do to others. But that's not the whole scenario. For example, Abiy gets his most solid support from evangelical Christians. Evangelical fundamentalism has been probably causing havoc throughout Africa. And I could mention, for example, Brazil, where they have been the most or they have been playing the most detrimental role, especially when it comes to the black population in Brazil. So we have to see that there is of course Islamic fundamentalism. So we will have to put into consideration all of that. Just a reminder. I think I will stop there. Thank you. Oh, sorry. One thing. The last information that I have heard about Patriarch Antonius is that when he during his funeral in the monastery that he grew up, I think it's well, you wouldn't know it. Anyway, in that monastery, you would you would expect the monks, other religious dignitaries, priests and diaconus would come to his funeral, and that's exactly what happened. But what Sha'biya did was probably exactly what's expected of it. It detained most of the clergy that came to the funeral of it used the funeral of Patriarch Antonius to attract all these dignitaries that supposedly are on the side of Patriarch Antonius. And the latest news that we have heard is that many of them have been detained by the government. Thank you.
That's indeed. I mean, for those who are following us online now, and when Yosef repeatedly mentioned Shabia is the ruling party, the one-man party we can call of Eritrea that is orchestrating all this. Professor Skel, your final word?
Yeah, um, I'm not quite optimistic about peace and peacemaking. And I have no faith in the United States or the UN or other multinational organizations will be able to finesse the intricate labyrinth and that is Ethiopian politics. I don't think they understand it enough to be able to resolve the conflict and bring peace. I think the external effort in general, whether that is the US or the UN or the AU or even the Kenyatta Initiative, these are efforts to end the war. It's not about bringing peace. The external effort may end the war, but it cannot bring about peace. In all of these ventures, governments in general and governmental organizations or organizations of governments such as the UN or the AU, they always invariably favor governments over rebels. And those who are opposing the government in Ethiopia are considered rebels. So this is in the DNA of governments. They support governments that are in place, whatever that form of government is. Even organizations of government such as the US and UN are always going to be on the side of governments. That's not new. We know that. We have known that for 50 years since the African independence. We have seen that governments always are on the side of governments. Though they cannot bring peace, they don't favor war unless they're selling their weapons to them. So they don't favor war. In the case of African places like Ethiopia, it doesn't help them right now, except maybe the United States concerned about the Chinese juggernaut in the Horn of Africa. What makes peace is the dynamics in Ethiopia. What is critical to making peace in Ethiopia is the critical component is what that can contribute to peacemaking is what is going on in Ethiopia. But what I see as far as the dynamics and the political maneuverings in Ethiopia are concerned, they're not promising. They're not promising at all. And that's what I was saying earlier, that the political system that the Prosperity Party had put in place is showing signs of age. So young, but so aged because it is basically the EPRDF that had simply changed its name. It's unable to rise up to the occasion to address the issues that contribute to war, to conflict. It's not able to do that, but it is also showing some cracks. The evidence, the most important evidence is on the Somali side. These are just put together in a basket. These are different entities with different needs, with different political goals, are put together forcibly in a basket. They are not. There is nothing that glues these political parties that are in the Prosperity Party together. There's still OPDO, there is still EPDM, there is still the Somali. They are in there with their effaced identity, but they have not become a merged party that is working for an ideology and a cause. And any organization doesn't have a cause, a goal, a purpose, at some point in time would start to crumble. That will happen to political parties as well. So the political system is not in a position to really address the conflict, the problems of the conflict. It is manufacturing the conflict, and it's probably unable to address it. What concerned me from the thing that I said at the beginning is that the EOC, or the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, or the politicians that have ensconced themselves in the church, in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and we all know them. Even the patriarch of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church had said there is one organization that had colonized the EOC. This is the patriarch himself saying it. So that organization is an organization of politicians who are parading themselves as religious people. They parade themselves in religious garb. And they have colonized the church. They are the ones that are speaking for church. Listen to what they're saying, all of them. Read what they're writing, and you will find out what they are about. All of what they're demanding of Ethiopia has nothing to do with the religion, has nothing to do with religion whatsoever. It's all political demands, as I said early on. The idea of desecularizing the Ethiopian state after 50 years of the separation of the EOC from the Ethiopian government, and the demand for the restoration of the role of the church to its adherents to the exceptional position that it had enjoyed. They demand this for the sake, and they say this in clearest terms, for Ethiopia's national survival. If the church did not return to its historic role, they say, of protecting, the role of protecting Ethiopia against outsiders, the imported communities or faith communities the Protestants and the Muslims, and I'm not quoting this. This is from the politicians parading in as church people. They're saying that if they are not protected for this Middle Eastern agents and Protestants who were the forerunners of colonialism, whom they describe them as agents of the Arabs of the Middle East and Western conspiracy, we will not find Ethiopia as we have known it. And they declare that Ethiopia is in the middle of a civil war. That really concerns me. So with the political system unstable, but the huge institution of faith community, the AOC, is declaring war on Muslims and Protestants openly on television, day in, day out. That is what concerns it. Just that concerns me, that I'm not actually optimistic, because the decisive factor is not what outsiders do. The essential contribution would be from within the dynamics and maneuverings and movement in the country do not bode well for peace at all.
Thank you, Prof. I'm trying to connect this to even the church, as we speak, has successfully silenced its own patriarch from speaking up about the Tigray genocide on its own media. So this is something that is worth following. And this week happened that the Tigray Orthodox Church, for the first time, I think, in the country, has established its own church administration. It's not at the stage of establishing its own synod, but it's has severed its relationship with Addis Ababa. So what happens in the church is clearly determinantal to what would happen in the country. So this is something that we will closely follow. This is the patriarch speaking in March last year on a cell phone recorded by a visitor, because 45, I guess, or 40 minutes of interview recorded by the church media was banned from being broadcasted when he spoke about the Tigray genocide. Faisal, your final word for the day, please.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think my final word is not that far from what everybody said. I think we are trying to see, there is the Somali saying that when you have a horse that is sick, but you apply the medicine that is intended for the donkey, then you don't cure the horse. I think if we are applying, and I'm not saying we, us, but the world and everybody are applying an unnatural empire of Ethiopia, tools that are feeble and that are not really the right medicine to stitch this Humpty Dumpty waning empire together. That's the biggest problem. Until now, you at least had the North, meaning Tigray and Amaras, at least unified by the last one string. Everything else was broken for a while. Politics was broken, region was broken. The only string that was holding them together for the last few years was religion, Orthodox Christianity. And that is now being broken, as you just mentioned. That is the last string holding those Abyssinian members of that imperial state together. Now, if that has been broken, and if you know the history of Oromo and Somali and Kambata and Afar, you know that these little feign things that we have been applying all over the entire world, Ethiopia needs food, Ethiopia needs this and that, is not really a serious conversation. I think the serious conversation is, how can you really, suppose today there was no international framework, suppose people went by their way based on what the constitution is. Any constitution in the world says it's a social contract. If you like the social contract, you stay with it. If you don't like the social contract, you leave it. Suppose the UN and the world and the bilateral relationship was not there to stop Tigray or Oromia or Somalis for that matter. Do you think with the massacres and mayhem and killings that people are and the blockade people are experiencing, they will still say we love Abiy's leadership and we love the Ethiopia that has had 3,000 years of history. It's a laughing matter. So this is a very serious, especially for those people who want to call themselves ethno-Ethiopian nationalists. You can never insult, instill the values that you have in Gondar in the mind of a young Somali who never really gave that recognition to what that guy in Gondar believes. So the problem is bigger than two sides talking. The problem is very serious. As Skayal said, Ethiopia entered at the highest phase of civil war. And people who want to have conversation on this issue as to what the solution it will not come from the United States. And I like to mention that it will not come from the United States. It will not come from anywhere. It will come from the people who share this empire. The Somali region is only having the president on power because of these people, what I call claptrap Naftanyas, who think the same way the white South Africans used to think about the natives. Here are people who are less educated, less informed, and anytime some political real issue takes place within the Somali, instead of letting the Somalis sort out their issue, they just jump and try to dictate their views on a region that they have no relationship, that they know nothing about. So, and then people just, they create more dissension among the Somalis. So the point is, I think we need to be serious as to how fragile the current Ethiopia is. If you don't recognize that fragility, if you still think that the church lost its power, indeed it lost its power. It lost the power that it used to be the second arm of the state, and it was the most powerful arm, and it owned a huge proportion of the Oromo, Gurage, and Kambata land. If you romanticize those days, I don't think that is leading us into a better journey. So I think with discussions like this, we need to really come with a serious framing of the question, and then from framing we have to seek the solution. Neither Abiy nor the church nor the Ethiopian nationalists have been serious as to how the outcry is serious that's coming from the Tigray, Somali, Oromo, Afar, what have you. I don't. That's why I don't see the UN taking a serious role, the United States taking a serious role, nor Abiy's office with his purported peace negotiation being serious enough. We need to come to the table with recognizing how huge the problem is. Then, if we frame the problem, probably I'm sure we can come with the right solutions. Up to now, we haven't touched the problem.
Great. Thank you, Faisal. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Professor Zgail Gabisa, for all the insightful interventions today. And I know this was a big topic, a big tent to capture everything under the same roof. But I think it was insightful, and we'll continue the conversation when we meet next week with the H panel. I thank you very much for your time today, and see you next week.
Sure.
You have been following us live on Facebook and YouTube. I hope the sound and the video was not compromised today. I am in the field. Um, it's worth mentioning and recapturing that today, this week, this was the highlight, one of the highlights, among other things. Ethiopian relics on eBay may have been looted from Tigray, experts fear. So they talk about cultural cleansing, cultural genocide. Uh, Throughout the war, the past 14 months plus months, we saw that there has been a destruction and looting, pillage, looting of heritage sites, churches, mosques, and so on. So they are increasingly showing up on eBay and other platforms. And those who are following us live, please report this to the Interpol. And actually, because of that reporting from the Times, the eBay has taken down the items, but it doesn't mean they will be back to their um, rightful owners. So please, the heritages, including the Garima Gospels, this is one of the Christian world's greatest artifacts. They are looted from Tigray and on eBay and other platforms. So those who are following us live and those who will watch this later, please report this to the Interpol. Your host was Getachew Asafa. Please subscribe, share, like so that our viewership increases as we bring a more insightful conversation to the viewers. Bye for now. Have a good one.